And welcome back to a new episode of the Dragon Heads. And you're going to notice that things look a little bit different because we have not only changed the night that we're now recording on Monday nights instead of Thursday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern as usual, but we've added a host, Mr. I believe we're going with Dungeon Kyle, if I'm not mistaken. How are you doing this evening, sir?
Doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining us. And always, we've got the fantastic Dragon Joe with us. How are you doing, sir?
I'm hanging in there.
Fantastic. Things are going to be changing up just a little bit. I'm going to be your master of ceremonies. I'm going to be guiding us through this adventure that we're going to be taking on Monday nights. So we're going to be starting off really quick, going in right into our bit of news here. I'm going to take this first bit of news because it's about Strixhaven. We've talked a little bit about Strixhaven on the show so far. But apparently, during the playtest, a lot of people were having some issues with the new subclasses that multiple classes could take. So it made things a little weird. I guess, like, just reading through this article, it says that the Mage of Lorehold, for example, could be taken by bards, warlocks, or wizards. These are gone. Wizards of the Coast listened to the fans and dropped this. I guess a lot of the people that were playtesting it didn't like the fact that you could have multiple subclasses basically ran by different characters in the group. So it's not very often you actually hear of a developer or something like that listening to their fans. A lot of bad news with developers going on right now, but it's good to see that Wizards of the Coast is taking their playtest seriously and kind of siding with the fans, letting the fans decide what should stay and shouldn't. Kind of like that.
Well, the thing I see about it is that there's a lot of things that you want your character to have strengths and weaknesses, and what it sounds like is this does one of those things where I don't want to say that it makes it a power game or move, but it makes you cover up all your weaknesses and cover up any glaring problems that your character might have, and that makes it so that each character can't like step into, well, hey, the rogue's gonna lockpick, okay, hey, the fighter's gonna step up into combat, oh, the bard's gonna step up in this social situation. It doesn't let your character whatever they're really good at shine, and I think that's one of the big things that draws people to D&D.
Yep.
That was very well spoken, sir. I can't really state that any better.
So the second bit of news here, Kyle, I'm gonna have you take this one. This one's about a little bit of Critical Role news here.
Yeah, so this one actually, you guys brought me onto this. It's a expansion to the Tal'Dorei campaign setting from the first campaign of Vox Machina. And honestly, I have the current Tal'Dorei book, and I love it. It's great inclusion of everything you could possibly ask for. If they're gonna do, I'm reading here, it's 280-page expansion that's set 20 years in the future. That's great. Like, bring it on. Joe, I know you said you really enjoy the setting.
I love this setting, and one of the things that I just looked at to make sure the original campaign guide only had 143 pages. So literally, they're doubling the size with this Tal'Dorei Reborn, and I understand that they're adding a lot of things to it, to the more in depth about the cities, more adventure hooks, more a little bit of everything. I mean, I think there's even some new subclasses. There's some new items. There's new everything, and because of that, what happens with Matt Mercer is like whenever they did Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, they had to cut down because he gave them so much material, and it was one of those things that they were so like overwhelmed by it that they're like, hey, we can't fit all of this into the book, we need to make some sacrifices here. and it's funny that this is doing the exact opposite of practically doubling the size of the original. And the other thing that I found out from a friend, because he was looking for the Tal'Dorei Campaign Guide, because it's been out of print for, I want to say, over 2 years now. And the funny thing is that, like, if you go on eBay or any of the book sites where you're trying to find it, they're selling for the original $40 book is selling for almost $200.
Jeez.
And
Really?
yeah, and like I admit, like when my friend was like, "Man, I'm really looking for if I can find it for $100, I'll buy it," And I'm like, I was shocked by it, and
Holy cow.
it this has been the biggest thing that they've wanted to that fans have wanted them to reprint, and here they are reprinting and expanding on it. But at the same time, if you have one of the original copies, it's still going to be worth some money because it's an original edition. And I think I like that sort of play rather than just saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to reprint it."
Yeah, just a
It
reprint would have diminished that initial value on the basically a collector's item now.
right, and they've done enough stuff with Funko Pops. They've done enough stuff with you know, comic books and other things like that, that they understand that sort the way that market sort of works with it, and they understand that people really want the original, but they also are like, well, hey, we can get the whole expanded universe here. Let's roll with it.
I mean, when you are always offering more to your end consumer is the best route to take.
Yeah, definitely. So then we've got this one just came to us. Joe brought this up to us. Joe turned me onto the Dungeon Dudes, but I guess the Dungeon Dudes have a pretty spectacular Kickstarter going on right now. So Joe, why don't you tell us about this Dungeon Dudes Kickstarter here?
Well, first off, I'm blown away by how much they're they're doing, because first and foremost, their initial goal was $20,000 to get their Dungeons of Drakheim, and it was funded in 5 minutes. And they're currently sitting at, as of this recording right now, $944,448, and have 9,303 backers, and they have 4 days to go. So they have a chance that they might hit $1 million. And these are guys that they made videos on YouTube and then streamed their homebrew world on YouTube, and then they made a book about it. And it's just amazing to see guys, come up come up from the bottom basically, and be successful with it. It's great news. And from what I've heard of the module, the setting, it sounds fantastic. It's a grim, like gothic, like grim horror mixed with like a medieval apocalypse, and it sounds absolutely crazy with like monsters that are changed by radiation and wild magic, and it blows me away that they're doing so as well as they are. And I love seeing people that you remember following when they were like, less than 50,000 subscribers on YouTube and stuff like that, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember when there were 10,000. I was one of the 10,000 subscribers to this channel. It's just great to see those guys succeed and excel at what they're doing.
Yeah, I've been poking around some of their videos because you actually told me, suggested them to me, and really liking their YouTube content. I haven't watched any of their playthroughs of this yet because I have a million episodes of Critical Role that I need to catch up on. I haven't watched campaign 1 or 2. I'm just getting in. I'm keeping
That's
up
a
with
must. That's a must,
Exandria
man.
Unlimited. Watching um There Will Be Dungeons, which I just got listening to this week's episode of that show. their old DM is actually coming back, and they're going to finish up his storyline that he was running with them in the Wastes, and I'm super pumped for that. But flipping through this Kickstarter here, if they hit $1 million, I'm looking at their stretch goals here. They're adding more mutated monsters and character sheets. Just the amount of stuff that they have went and added for the stretch goals because of how much money they've made. It's crazy. Just multiple new adventure sites, um, new types of weapons. I'm I'm gonna have to find even more time to listen to another show while I'm at work. Um, thanks, Joe. It's just keeping me filled
Welcome.
with podcasts to listen to.
I'm flipping
And
through. I'm flipping through their Kickstarter right here, and they got really good bang for their like what they asked for. So I can see why a lot of people are helping them out. Like you get a lot for a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to check this out. Thanks, Joe.
you're welcome.
So up next is we're actually going to be doing things just a little bit different this week. Um, with the date change and add the new host, we figure what better time than to do our first main discussion. So no top five and no rulebook corner or encounter this week, but we're gonna do this main discussion. We're gonna talk about how to obtain more AC as a wizard or a sorcerer specifically. So, Joe, this was kind of your lead in here. So, what are we thinking about getting people a little bit of extra AC on these classes that typically don't have a lot of AC coming to them?
Well, one of the first things is that I know you guys have both been watching Exandria Unlimited, and one of the things that meant that Matt Mercer did with uh, Dariax is that he's a sorcerer, but he's wearing medium armor. And initially, you kind of think about that for a second, and the sorcerers are always really like sorcerers and wizards because they have the lowest hit dice. They've got just a d6. They are usually, if I say standard, like they don't have any armor, and they mainly have to rely on their spells to get them in and out of situations. Well, Mercer did this thing where he picked the I believe it is let me double check. It is the mountain dwarf, which mountain dwarves have dwarven armor training, and you get proficiency in light and medium armor. And in addition to that, you also get a +2 to your con. So you're giving yourself more hit points, and you're allowing yourself to get into medium armor, which you're able to uh, boost up a little bit of you boost your AC, and all medium armor gives you. We went over this in one of the rules corners. A minimum of +2 dexterity to the medium armor, so you're able to have like somewhere around like a 16, 17 AC, which is crazy high as a sorcerer. Like sorcerers are used to having like an AC of 12. And it's like if they get something like bracers of unarmored defense, or um there's a couple other magic items that it's like if they get up to a 14 or 15 AC, they're feeling beefy. Well, this at level 1, you're looking at a AC of 15, 16, and then if you get like a breastplate later on, it bumps it up even more. And I thought that this was a great idea to start rolling into the idea of, well, what other ways can we buff a wizard or sorcerer AC from a race, and roll with it. And I know Kyle actually has a character in one of our campaigns that is a turtle wizard. So go and hit your reasoning behind that, Kyle.
Well, it was pretty simple. Turtle wizards, or Turtle has the natural armor ability, which naturally gives you an AC of 17. Boom, that's it. I don't have to wear armor. My shell is my armor. So, like, as a wizard, I'm already feeling that confident. If you thought 14, like you said earlier, they were a little confident, what do you think of 17 is? And that's without anything.
I think it's really good, and then it's one of those things. If you have shield on top of that,
Uh,
it bumps it up. Like you're able to be like, well, does a 21 hit? And you're like, shield
no,
22, baby.
exactly. It's great. It's one less thing that I have to worry about, and I'm not afraid to get into combat. In fact, this turtle is a homebrew that I've worked with my DM with closely to work out and balance. And he uses a sword and casts spells as he's meleeing with hits with the sword. So it's I need to be in front of combat. There's been a lot of times that I remember the time I fell into the pit of spiders and I pulled into my shell utilizing its shell defense ability of the turtle too. So I just pop into the shell and you guys took care of all the spiders and I come out and go, thanks guys. You know, it works. I actually really like turtles.
Well, and the other thing was is I started digging through some of the other races, and I'm looking on like what other races have any sort of hold on a second. Sorry, animals. Um, but I started looking at other races to try to see if there's anything that has from their race gives them either an armor proficiency, some type of unarmored defense or bonus to their AC, or gives them a solid bump to their constitution. And one of the things I came across a couple things that I was like, these kind of hit some of those bases, but they're not full on. And the first one was actually the Hobgoblin. They have martial training, which you get proficiency in 2 martial weapons and light armor. Now, light armor doesn't usually sound like, oh, that's really, really impressive. But whenever you start saying, well, I'm able to wear light armor just because I'm a hobgoblin, and you're ultimately a caster hobgoblin, well, that matters because suddenly you're able to wear the studded leather is the highest one, and you're bumping yourself up to 15. Plus, they get a +2 to con, and it's one of those things that I actually, as I'm starting to look at this, I'm like, I could see a hobgoblin being a wizard and have a decent amount of make a decent caster versus some of the like your standard human. The other one that I came across was the Warforge. Now, obviously, they're not going to be allowed in every setting by your DM, so take this with a grain of salt. But the integrated protection, you're able to get a bonus to your armor class. You can don armor which you have proficiency with, and don a shield, but you can incorporate it into your body over the course of an hour. Now, it doesn't say that you gain a proficiency there, but it's one of those things that I feel like it could be really useful for just that +1 to your armor class, and then additionally, if you're able to get your Constitution score up, and then whatever other ability you wanna have. So it's one of those ones. I don't think that the Warforged is one of those ones that they're built for a reason. And if your reason is, oh, I'm a caster, it makes sense that, okay, yeah, you're going to be good at kind of everything. But I still don't think that the Warforged is going to have as high of an AC as, say, the Mountain Dwarf that we were talking about earlier. What about you guys? Do you guys do any other races or something that might be able to push past just the basic, like I'm wearing cloth armor,
The only other one that comes to mind would be the Githyanki. They have a martial. Oh, it's like I think it's martial prodigy or something like that. It gives them proficiency with medium and light armor, with great swords and long swords just off the rip at level 1, just from a race without having to be a class. So that's kind of cool.
So
Yeah.
not fully.
The only
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say I fully agree with that. Now I forgot about the gift Yankee. But correct me if I'm wrong, Kyle. Are typically the gift Yankee are usually the more of the melee fighters, and the gift Zerai are more of the casters. Usually.
It's usually that's how it is. But
Okay,
there's always
so
those people that want to min max.
I'm not arguing that, but I'm just saying it would be a very interesting story of why a gift Yankee decided to become a caster. That would be an interesting RP plot, I guess. What were you saying? What were you saying, Thorn? I'm sorry.
Not being kind of the newer here and using D&D Beyond, and it just does things for me. Like a constitution modifier. How does that work in regards to AC? Like,
Well, it doesn't work in regards to AC. It works in regards to HP.
okay,
So for each +1 you have to your Constitution, every time you level up, you either roll your hit dice for what you're going to get, and then you add your Constitution modifier. So if you have a Constitution modifier of 2, and you are normally a D6 as a wizard, and you roll a 5, and then you have a Constitution modifier of 2, that means you're going to add 7 HP to your total HP at that level. So the other thing is that if you take there's certain I know for there's one of the dwarf races, it's the I think is it the hill dwarf? Yeah, the hill dwarf. Your maximum hit points increases by 1 every time you gain a level. So it's one of those things that it just gives you more HP, which gives you a little bit more survivability. There's also like the tough feat. The tough feat also gives you 2 HP per level, and it backdates that. So if you take it at level 8 or level 12, you'll get 2 HP for each level that you already have,
gotcha.
and then 2 additional HP for each level you ultimately gain. So no, those feats are usually kept for like barbarians, fighters, but it also makes sense that if you're a wizard and you're like, well, I don't want to die, like I could see a variant human wizard have the tough feat. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And that seems a little counterproductive because you're like, I'm a caster, but I 1 HP. It's one of those things that if you're taking it at like your 4, 8, or 12 ability score improvement, it's one of those things I kind of go, eh. But if it's something that you get off of like a variant human, I would understand it more. So it's one of those things that the two things that you're looking for is you're trying to make a wizard or sorcerer be able to survive, and the two ways to do that is increase your HP and increase your AC.
so uh, one of the reasons why, because you'd mentioned constitution earlier. And just kind of flipping through some of the races, I came across the Loxodons, who have natural armor. You have thick, leathery skin. When you aren't wearing armor, your AC is 12 plus your Constitution modifier. So you said they usually stick around 12, but with a decent Constitution modifier, you could be looking at like 15, 16 maybe? Because it
Yeah.
also says that you could also a shield's benefit apply as normal. I don't know. I don't think wizards and sorcerers are able to use standard shields, if I'm not mistaken.
Unless they get unless they get a bonus from something like that. I mean, it's one of those weird things where like you want to have like if you were able to carry a shield, that's great, but you have to have proficiency in shield.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's going to be a detriment to you. Um, the other thing I will say about Loxodon, and again, that's one of those setting specific races.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing about the Loxodon is they also get their trunk, and that works as like a third hand. There's things about that where they'll have the trunk hold a torch, and they still have both their hands free. There's a lot of useful ways that I've seen people that Loxodons use their trunk. I remember the one I remember there was a miniature of a Loxodon bard, and you see him holding the like fiddle, and the trunk is actually using
The
the
bow.
bow for the fiddle, and then he's got the other hand free. So it's one of those things that it's it, there's a lot of advantages there, but there's also you almost have to prioritize Constitution there, and like I would say to the point where it would almost have to be your main stat or your second stat.
Mm-hmm.
But I could see where that would be very useful and very if you have plus 40 or con, you're at a 16 AC, and doing pretty well. Plus, they already start off with a +2 to con anyhow, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and the only reason that I even clicked into them is because I had the image of an Eldritch Blast coming out of the trunk of an elephant. That's kind of why I was thinking about it. I was like, if you played a Loxodon Sorcerer, you could just sneeze out spells out of the trunk. That's where everything would come out of. That weird role playing mind of mine.
That would be an interesting thematic component for sure.
And kind of staying true to the lore that the Loxodon comes from, it's when they merge with magic together, that's where they come from. And they actually do use their trunks as like a third hand.
Yeah.
I think it would be so cool. So, anything else on the wizard or sorcerers and kind of natural like race based ways to increase their AC from anyone?
You know what? I'm sure there's another one out there that we're overlooking, and I just I don't know what it would be off the top of my head. I felt like I feel like there was something with Dragonborn, but whenever I looked back over them, I didn't see anything that they got like a bonus to their AC or got any special like unarmored defense or anything, and other than like their damage resistance. But as far as I can think of, I think that's the main the main things that I can think of that you the main way the main races that you can increase your AC one way or another.
Yeah, throughout all of the editions, it's been kind of rare for a race to have a armor class stat variant. So it's actually kind of impressive. In 5th edition, we got as many as we do.
All right. So I wrote this week's backstory simply because I was gushing over the trickery domain priest last week. I had to come up with a way to make my Loki character. So I present to you Betruger, trickery domain cleric. Found in a cave, Betruger was raised in an orphanage as the only Goliath child amongst the races. The other children feared and, in some cases, picked on and bullied him. Uh, the only source of enjoyment that Betruger actually came across was creating mischief and pranks amongst the other children. His pranks had caught the eye of the deity, the Traveler. The Traveler bestowing his gifts on Betruger in exchange for any mischief to be in his name going forward. The Traveler gifted Betruger with the spells and knowledge of a trickery domain cleric. As an added reward for his worship, the Traveler granted him the appearance of a human as to not draw any unwanted attention upon himself, just like our friend Loki being a frost giant that looks like a general Asgardian. I wanted to make sure that I had he is naturally a very large and kind of odd looking compared to regular races, but looks the appearance of a regular human or whatever race may be. So I wanted to make sure that I covered all those bases, but had him following one of the deities. And I went through and I was looking at all the deities, and I feel like the Traveler was the best of the kind of the mischief deities that were listed in the trickery domain. So what do you guys think about my Loki variant here?
I think it sounds pretty cool. The one thing I will say though is that the one of the big things of the trickery domain cleric is that they get disguise self, and like you put it into the backstory, but
Mm-hmm.
you're basically saying, hey, I'm able to cast disguise self and make myself look like a human. I'm able to make myself look like an elf. I'm able to make myself look like I don't think you could go down, but because the restrictions of disguise self, I think you have to be within a foot of your actual height, either like up or down.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a 7 foot tall Goliath, you can't become a 4 foot tall dwarf.
Yeah.
But you could be a 6 foot tall human. You could be a 6 foot tall tiefling. You could be a whatever is acceptable in that city or that setting, that within reason. And I think that's great. Um, I don't want to spoil your enjoyment of Critical Role, but I will say there's a lot to learn about the Traveler.
Oh God, the adventures of the Traveler and TravelCon. You get to experience TravelCon.
Oh God, TravelCon.
Like, hell yeah.
That was such such a cluster.
It was great though they never went down into the abyss.
I know.
Ford wanted to so bad,
I
and I'm
need
like,
to make time for it because everybody that I talk to that watches and listens to the show is like, you haven't listened to everything. I'm like, no, there's like 400 episodes. Like, I just found out about it like 2 months ago. Give me time.
yeah, it's a lot to take, especially all at once, but it's
Mm-hmm.
worth it. It's a great storyline, and Matt does a great job at sticking to the core rules of D&D, which is kind of rare when you want get like homebrew worlds. So,
And I think that's a beautiful thing about Exandria Unlimited is that you're seeing Abria's dungeon mastering style be like almost a complete 180 of Matt, where Matt is always kind of the I want to say rules lawyer, and the he's very kind of by the book,
he's fair about
but
it
he
though.
does right. He's very fair about it, but Bria is that rule of cool
Yeah,
DM.
I
Oh, you're doing this really epic thing that's awesome.
I
All right, I'll let you roll for it. And it's like that's not how the rules work, but it's that one epic moment that's really cool, and she's letting you go hog wild for it.
yeah, like she's given DM inspiration multiple times, and honestly, I kind of forgot that was the thing.
Well, and I think again, it's one of those things that Matt doesn't usually do that, and there's the one that sticks out to me was there was one time where Sam was antagonizing him about something. He says the next time you do that, because I think it was the Britney Spears where he plays the dun 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 dun,
Yeah.
and he said if you do that one more time, your character's taking 2d10 psychic damage. And lo and behold, like halfway through the session, he did it, and literally he rolled. He's like, "You take 8 damage," just because it was he warned him, he gave him a chance, and then it.
Yeah, no, I understand. But honestly, back to Brock's backstory. Honestly, you thought that out pretty well, and I wish my players as a DM would hand me something like that. A DM can work wonders with that backstory.
I think that's
Well,
like my favorite thing to do is come up with backstories. I played a game. I played one session, and then the group fell apart. But I had a whole giant backstory as to why my tiefling ranger was a oh god, what it was the at the time it was an unleashed or an unearthed arcana, uh the swamp keeper. He was a swamp keeper ranger, and he was absolutely insane. And I had this detailed backstory. So the first session we sit down and we're going around the table, and they start with me to give the backstory, and I give my backstory, and everyone at the table is like, I didn't even like come up with a quarter of what you just came up with. My dude's from a city and he's a paladin. I'm like, well, crap.
No, you
I
did it right. You did it right.
well, and I'll ask you both of you guys, what when you're a DM, what do you want to see from a backstory? Like, do you want a little bit of like wiggle room? Do you want like stuff that you can work in whatever the plot to your story is? What are you looking for when you get a player's backstory?
Honestly, I would. First thing I'm looking for is ways I can integrate their backstory into the campaign setting or the adventures that they're going to go on. If there's some way to tie a single person to a task, it becomes a lot more than just go complete this task. There's a reason to do it. And so it pulls the player in a lot more than just go collect 15 boar meat, you know. So that's the first thing I
The
look for.
standard World of Warcraft quest.
Yeah,
hmm
exactly.
See, and
Um,
I haven't actually DM'd. I've only ever been a player, but listening to like uh uh man, I'm drawing a blank on the show. There Will Be Dungeons. The current campaign that they're running, one of the characters, his backstory is basically because they break it down into like 12 episode seasons. This second season, his backstory was essentially the whole plot line of like the main story arc. It got worked in. Um, and having a backstory that can either affect the world or be directly a part of the world's lore that's being created, I think that that's massive. If I was to DM a game and somebody came to me and was just like, I'm a paladin from this city, I could work with it, but I would have way more fun if somebody said, I'm a paladin from a city and I chose this life because of this. I was pushed down these paths by, wanting to take revenge on this or whatever the story might be. If it gives me points that I can put in an enemy or a setting that would directly affect that character and their emotions, I would have way more fun with that than just your standard I'm a guy.
Well, the other thing is that I think there's two big types of discrepancy there. Is if you have the one where you have this big complex backstory of what happened to you and how you ended up where you're at. Okay, that's great, and we could, like, as a DM, I can use that. But the other version of that, and this is, I want to say, a little scary as a player, where you say, "Hey, I woke up here and I don't know how I got here. I don't know how I got these powers. I don't know anything." And let the DM tell you everything, or let them work you into their plot. And it's it can be a lot of fun because you're basically discovering more about your character and more about what your character does, versus the exact opposite of that, where you're like, I have this huge long backstory. I'm looking for my nemesis. I'm looking for the people that killed my family, you know. But at the same time, that can be just as compelling.
Definitely.
It's just you gotta find a way to make your players invested into one, their character, and two, the world. So if you can find that magic point between all 3 points, then you got it made.
Absolutely.
Yep. Would not agree any more. So I
So,
think.
but
Oh, go ahead.
I have to ask one thing.
Yep.
The main thing of the trickster domain is the invoke duplicity. How would you use that? It's been killing me.
With with the character that I created,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would probably use it in the early stages uh to basically I would now I don't know a whole lot about the cleric classes. The what is that
I believe
spell
it's
type
as an
called?
action you can make. I believe it's an illusion.
It's an
It's one
illusionary
of your
duplicate of yourself. I have it right here.
yeah.
Because
It's a domain. Yeah.
It's a channel divinity.
yeah, channel divinity. That's what
That's
I'm thinking.
funny. Yeah, that's what I'm talking.
Okay.
So you can only do channel divinity once per long rest, correct?
I think it's twice.
It's yeah, think once or twice. No, once. I can't remember.
See, in kind of what I'm thinking, and again, this is almost kind of taking something directly from Loki. Um, I would try to pair it along with the other channel divinity, which is vanish. I believe is the what it's called. You basically you just disappear. Um, create my illusion at one point in the room, vanish in my spot, move, and with the duplicity you're able to cast spells from either yourself or your duplicity. Later on you're able to make 4 duplicities. You cause all kinds of chaos. But I would use it mostly out of combat for changing the way that a scenario is going to be handled. If I'm having a conversation with someone and the conversation isn't necessarily going the way that I want it to go, I duplicity somewhere on the other side of them, vanish, and then skirt on out of there, or I put myself on either side of my enemies and alternate casting spells from myself and my duplicity, hoping that they can't figure out which one is which. And I do know that if both duplicities are within 5 feet of the target, all attack rolls against me or the duplicity are rolled with disadvantage because the attacker is confused. So I would probably, again, I don't know if I would want to be a cleric standing right next to my attacker though. That might not be the greatest idea. I would probably use it more for a little bit of mischief creating, more so than in combat. I think the vanish is a way more combat oriented for me, to just get out of those sticky situations when my enemies get close to me.
I will say this, that the in combat, the duplicate has two really good uses in my opinion. One is that you can leave the duplicate by one of your allies, and if they need healed, like by a touch spell like Cure Wounds, you just say, "Hey, reach up and slap him on the back and give him a Cure Wounds." Um, the other thing is that if you have your duplicate approach an enemy, you could cast something like Blight, that is a touch spell, or I'm trying to remember the other cleric, it's the other necromancy one that that's touch.
Oh,
But it what was that?
no, it's the opposite of heal. I can't think of it.
Harm.
Harm. Yep.
Harm. Thank you. That's the one I was thinking of. Like I said, I was just blanking out on the name. Harm. Yeah, but blight or harm, and it's one of those things that you can do a touch spell without putting yourself in melee with the whatever big bag thing is fighting. The other thing I will say is that your duplicate also doesn't have isn't restricted by rough or difficult terrain. So if there's a big thing of water, the duplicate can run across the water, can run across lava, can run across any surface and still attack something with a melee spell attack, or heal something that is that it can get to.
Essentially
It
makes you
so it
touch 120 foot.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess I
So
never really thought of that.
Really does.
it's one of those things that you don't think about what you can do with a duplicate in combat until you are in combat with it and you're using it.
Yeah, that I
Like,
mean, I've never played a caster, so like the only thing that I've played that's had any sort of like spells is rangers, and it's cure wounds that I pick up. Um, and it's only ever been the touch spell. So thinking about that, a 120-foot touch spell is that's pretty. I mean, in my thought process, is pretty potent.
well, the the duplicate has to move. It only has a 30-foot movement,
Mm-hmm.
so it can only go so far so fast. But it's one of those things that the duplicate is useful in combat. Like you initially, like, it's one of those things that if you look at a spell or you look at an ability and you think, that's not going to be very good in combat. Now, and when you initially look at the duplicate, because it takes an action to cast, and it's one of those things you're like, man, I don't want to waste an action just to make this duplicate that might be helpful in combat. And then lo and behold, once you do something like that, it feels like you're kind of setting up for your next turn, but you're setting up, and then it's like you can go one direction, your duplicate can go the other direction, and you're still able to cover everybody with heal or um heals or damage depending on what you need. The one catch with the duplicate is its concentration. So if you were to cast Bless, Spirit Guardians, or one of the many other concentration spells that clerics have, it's one of those things you lose your duplicate.
The other thing too is if you throw your duplicate up against the big baddie, obviously you're going to have a tank that's up, usually melee, fighting him. You can put your duplicate behind him and then give advantage on for your attacks for you and your tank, because you can flank it because it counts as a party member. So it's just another good way of the indirect bonus of the invoke duplicity.
I don't know if it's able to give flanking. I'm not really up to date on flanking rules because my DM doesn't use them. But I thought flanking said something to the effect of that they had to be I forget the wording exactly. Something like a threatened area, and an illusionary copy doesn't sound like it would be threatening the area. Like if you had your duplicate up against an enemy and a rogue went to attack it, it wouldn't get sneak attack because the duplicate was there, right?
Honestly, I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm currently trying to look up flanking rules in the PHB, but I think it was more just a DM thing.
Okay, well,
At
I mean,
least in the
if a
older editions, it was more just kind of the intention was meant that it was so realistic that it was very hard to discern which one was which. Therefore, it just classified as a party member. It became basically a pet.
well, I know that in fifth edition that an enemy can discern if it's an illusion by figuring, like, I think they have to make a perception check versus the spell DC
Yes.
of the caster. So if they're able to beat that spell DC, they realize it's an illusion, and I don't know if they would still consider a threat or not, because you can cast spells through it. Like that's one of those weird, like, I would have to double check like rule sources and whole nine yards, just because it's one of those weird situations that you're going to come up with once in a blue moon.
Yeah, I'm scouring the PHB real quick and I cannot find it quickly, so it's definitely something we'd have to look into.
It might be under the sage advice column.
Hmm.
Well, did you have anything else for us, Thorn?
I think that is it. We've got no rulebook corner this week and no encounters because of the little bit of a change up and busy week last week for everybody. So we'll kind of be back onto a normal type of schedule. We'll be working with coming up with some encounters for you guys. We'll dig into the rule book this coming week, maybe give you a top 5, maybe another main discussion. We'll have to wait and see exactly how that plays out. But unless you guys got anything else that you want to talk about, I think that's it for us tonight.
All right.
All
I
right.
just want to say thanks for having me.
No, thank you for joining us. I really think that having two knowledgeable individuals that can deep dive into some of the rules and then have my not so up to date on 5th edition rules kind of popping in there and asking those noob questions is going to really not only help us out in topics to cover, but for people like me that are out there that are just getting into it, because D&D is really starting to take off. It's been taking off for the last couple of years. I'm in a couple Facebook groups. There's a ton of people that are just getting into it. having somebody that's not afraid to ask those questions that might be seen in some communities as dumb questions or uh why wouldn't you know that type of things might help those individuals out a little bit more than if it was just a bunch of knowledgeable people that are talking everything at the highest level. I want to throw a little bit of that dumb down in there, uh, make it easier for new players to
Explain
learn
it to me
stuff.
like I'm 5.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what? That's the best way to explain it sometimes.
Yep. So
Well, it's said that it to fully understand something, you have to be able to explain whatever it is you're doing to a 5-year-old and have them understand it.
mhm.
That's when you fully master whatever it is you're doing.
And I have
Very well.
never said that I have a mentality above a 5-year-old, so that works out perfect. All right, guys, we're gonna wrap it up
We're
here.
just waiting for fart jokes.
Yeah. We are live over on Twitch. You can go over to you can find the show on Twitter at DragonHeads2. Email the show, dragonheads216@gmail.com, and follow the show right here on Twitch, twitch.tv/dragonheadspod. We record live Monday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern. Our intro music is A Self-Induced Psychosis by my buddy, Kyle Wynn. That's it for the show, guys. Everybody, have a great week. Slay some dragons. We will talk to you guys next week.
And good luck, adventurers.
Take it easy.